There's a plant growing in the crack of your sidewalk right now. You've stepped on it. You've mowed over it. If you've ever pulled weeds in your life, you've ripped this one out of the ground without a second thought and dropped it in a bag with the rest. It has flat, ribbed leaves that hug the dirt in a low rosette and a thin green spike that pokes up in the summer like a tiny green sparkler. Most people don't even know it has a name. And no, this isn't the starchy, banana-shaped thing you slice up and fry. Completely different plant. This one is a weed. The kind that grows in parking lots and driveways and the worn-down dirt of the path to your front door. What nobody walking past it realizes is that 1,000 years ago, this exact weed was considered one of the 9 most sacred plants on Earth. It was believed to have been handed to humanity by a god, and it was chanted over the bodies of the wounded by candlelight, in a language almost nobody alive can read anymore. A footpath in England, somewhere around the year 900, muddy ruts cut by cartwheels, the ground packed hard by centuries of feet and hooves. And right there, flattened into the edge of the trail where nothing else will grow, is our plant. The Anglo-Saxons had a name for it. They called it wegbraid, in modern English, waybread. The bread of the way, the plant of the road. They named it that because of where it grows. Plantain doesn't want soft, rich garden soil. It wants the hard stuff. The trampled, compacted, beaten-down earth of trackways and doorsteps. The Romans noticed the same thing centuries earlier, which is where its scientific name comes from. Plantago, from the Latin word for the sole of the foot. A plant named after the very thing that crushes it. Hold on to that detail. It matters more than it sounds like it should. So how does a roadside weed end up classified as sacred? For that, we have to talk about a book. In the 10th or early 11th century, somewhere in a monastery in England, a monk sat copying remedies onto parchment. The book he was helping assemble is known today as the Lacnunga, an Old English word that simply means remedies. It's not a tidy medical textbook, it's a jumble, a patchwork of recipes, salves, prayers, and incantations stitched together by people trying to hold on to knowledge that was already old when they wrote it down. And that's the strange part. These were Christian monks. But the cures they were preserving came from an older pagan world that the church was actively trying to replace. Instead of erasing it, they wrote it down. They copied out spells that called on heathen gods, sitting in a Christian monastery, probably a little uneasy about it. That tension is sitting right there on the page. Tucked inside this messy anthology is a poem. Scholars call it the Nigon Wirta Galdor, the 9 herbs charm. A Galdor wasn't a recipe. It was a spell, a thing you chanted out loud, and the instructions are weirdly specific about that. You were supposed to sing the charm 3 times over each of the 9 herbs before you prepared them. Then, sing it into the mouth of the sick person, into both of their ears, and directly onto the wound before applying the salve. The words weren't decoration. The Anglo-Saxons believed the spoken words were doing part of the healing. The version you've heard, if you've heard of it at all, is probably just 9 magic herbs. The real thing is far stranger than that, because halfway through the charm, the poem stops being about plants at all and turns into mythology. It tells a story. A serpent, a worm, comes crawling, and then a god steps in. The poem names him Woden, the Anglo-Saxon version of the Norse god Odin. Woden takes 9 glory twigs, 9 sacred rods, and strikes the serpent so hard that it shatters into 9 pieces. And from that act, the 9 herbs gain their power against 9 poisons. This is one of only 2 clear mentions of Woden anywhere in surviving Old English poetry. Think about that for a second. A god who barely appears in the written record of an entire people shows up here in a healing spell, swinging sticks at a snake. The herbs in your salve weren't just plants. In the logic of the charm, they were fragments of a divine weapon. So where does our weed fit into all of this? Plantain gets its own verse, and it's the one that gives the whole charm away. The poem addresses the plant directly, the way you'd speak to a person. It calls Plantain the mother of herbs, open to the east, mighty within. And then it describes, almost lovingly, everything that has ever happened to this plant on the road. Carts creaked over you, Women rode over you, brides wept over you, bulls snorted and stamped over you. You withstood all of it. You were crushed, and you held. Now stack that against what we said earlier. Plantain is the plant that grows where it gets stepped on. The plant that survives being flattened by wheels and hooves and feet and just keeps coming back. The Anglo-Saxons watched that happen, season after season, and they drew a conclusion. In folk medicine, there's an old principle. Like heals, a plant that can survive being crushed, bruised, and run over must understand injury better than any other plant. It has, in a sense, been wounded 1,000 times and recovered every time. So who better to heal a wound? That resilience wasn't just admired, it was read as a kind of qualification. The weed that refused to die became the medicine for bodies that were trying not to. It's a beautiful piece of reasoning. It's also, as we'll see, not entirely wrong. You might be wondering why 9 herbs? Why not 7? Why not 12? The number wasn't random. In the Germanic pagan world, 9 carried enormous weight. 9 worlds, 9 nights. Multiples of 3 stacked on top of each other. And there's a strong case that these particular herbs were tied to the high summer, gathered around the solstice when the plants were believed to be at their most potent. Mugwort, the oldest of the herbs, nettle, chamomile, fennel, crabapple, and plantain, sitting in that lineup, not as filler, but as the mother of the whole set. A roadside weed, ranked beside the sun at its peak. If you're enjoying this, take 1 second to subscribe. This channel digs into the hidden history of the most ordinary things around you, the objects and plants you walk past every single day. And there's a lot more where this came from. While the Saxons were chanting over plantain in England, the same plant was being quietly relied on almost everywhere else. And that's where this story stops being a local legend and starts becoming something much bigger. Because the Anglo-Saxons didn't invent the idea that plantain heals, they inherited it. Centuries before that monk picked up his pen, a Greek physician named Dioscorides was writing about plantain in the 1st century. His great work on medicine became the backbone of European pharmacy for more than 1,000 years, and plantain was in it, recommended for wounds and bites and inflammation. The Romans used it, Persian medicine used it, and on the far side of the world, with no contact whatsoever, traditional Chinese medicine was using plantain species too, for the urinary tract and to clear what they called heat from the body. Here's the detail that historians and scientists find genuinely hard to explain away. These cultures weren't sharing notes. There were no trade routes carrying a plantain instruction manual from China to England to Greece. And yet, independently, people who had never heard of each other looked at this same humble weed and came to the same conclusion. Put it on a wound, chew it onto a sting, drink it for a cough. When totally separate human traditions, with no shared books and no shared language, all arrive at the same use for the same plant, ethnobotanists have a name for it. They call it a signal. People thought they had the full picture of plantain as folklore and superstition. They were wrong. Convergence like this is the thing that makes scientists stop and say, wait, maybe these people were actually observing something real. We'll come back to whether they were right. First, the plant has a few more places to be. Fast forward to Elizabethan England, and plantain is so well known as a medicine that it shows up in a love story. In Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, written in the 1590s, there's a quick exchange where Romeo is teasing Benvolio. Benvolio's talking about cures, and Romeo cuts in. Your plantain leaf, he says, is excellent for that. For what? Benvolio asks, and Romeo answers, for your broken skin. That line only works if the audience already gets the joke, and they did. To a London crowd packed into a wooden theatre, a plantain leaf for a scrape was as obvious as a bandage. The most romantic playwright in the English language reached for a roadside weed as a throwaway reference, because everyone in the building knew exactly what it was for. The same weed in your driveway, on the stage, at the Globe. And then plantain did something that genuinely unsettled people. It started to move. When European colonists sailed for the Americas, they brought their medicine with them, and plantain came along, in seed and in soil, and stuck to boots and cargo. But plantain doesn't spread through wild forests. It spreads through disturbed ground, trampled paths, cleared land, settlements. So as Europeans pushed across North America, plantain pushed right behind them, sprouting along every new trail and every new town, marking the edges of colonization like a green shadow. The indigenous peoples of the Americas noticed this immediately. A new plant they'd never seen, appearing only where the newcomers had walked. And they gave it a name that was as much a political observation as a botanical one. They called it white man's foot. Some sources record it as Englishman's foot. The plant showed up wherever the colonizers set theirs down. You'd think a plant arriving as a symbol of invasion would be rejected. It wasn't. Native American healers studied it, recognized its drawing power on bites and wounds, and folded it straight into their own medicine, the same way the Anglo-Saxons had folded it into theirs, the same way the Greeks and the Persians and the Chinese had. The weed kept doing the one thing it had always done. It showed up where humans were, and it healed them. So we've got a plant that ancient Greeks, pagan Saxons, Persian physicians, Chinese doctors, Shakespeare's London, and indigenous American healers all independently used for wounds. The obvious question is the one nobody could answer for most of that history. Was any of it actually doing anything? Or were thousands of years of people just rubbing a weed on a cut and hoping? In the last few decades, labs finally pulled plantain apart to find out, and the answer is uncomfortable for anyone who likes to laugh at old folk remedies. Plantain leaves are loaded with a slimy substance called mucilage, which coats and soothes irritated tissue. That's the calming, demulcent effect that made it useful for sore throats and inflamed guts. They contain allantoin, a compound that actually speeds up the growth of new tissue, which is to say, it helps wounds close faster. And they contain something called aucubin, an iridoid glycoside that has been shown to slow the growth of certain bacteria, a natural, mild antimicrobial, sitting in a weed, for free. A plant to soothe, a compound to rebuild tissue, and a compound to fight infection. That is, more or less, exactly what you'd want in a wound dressing. The Saxons didn't know the chemistry, they just knew it worked, and they wrapped that knowledge in a spell about a god and a snake. It gets harder to dismiss. Researchers have run plantain ointment against standard pharmaceutical burn treatments in actual hospital settings, comparing it to the silver-based creams used on second-degree burns, and the plant held its own well enough that scientists are now seriously studying its compounds as possible tools against infected wounds and even antibiotic-resistant bacteria. A weed that gets pulled from garden beds is being investigated as a frontier against superbugs. You'd think someone would have flagged this centuries ago. In a sense, someone did. They just called it Woden's gift instead of a clinical trial. And if you're sitting there thinking you have no connection to any of this, you're probably wrong about that too. Walk into any pharmacy and look for the fiber supplements. The big tubs of powder you stir into water for digestion. A huge share of those are made from psyllium husk. Psyllium comes from a plant called Plantago ovata. Plantago. Same genus. A direct cousin of the weed from the Saxon charm. The seeds are wrapped in a husk that swells into a soothing gel in water, which is exactly why it works on your gut. And it's the same mucilage trick the leaves use on a wound. So the sacred herb of the Anglo-Saxons never actually left. It just changed clothes. The dramatic version, chanted over the dying, became a quiet orange tub on a shelf next to the vitamins. The mother of herbs got rebranded as a fiber supplement, and almost nobody made the connection. This is the part that's easy to miss in the whole story. Plantain was never rare. It was never exotic. There was nothing precious about it. The genus has more than 200 species, and they grow on every continent except Antarctica, in fields and lawns and roadsides all over the planet. In Latin America, it's called plantain, and you can buy it today in herbal markets from Mexico City to Lima, sold in the same bundles, brewed into the same teas, pressed onto the same bites and sores it's been treating for thousands of years. It asks nothing from anyone. No farming, no watering, no money. It grows in the crack, in the pavement outside your door, and it always has. So here's where we land. We tend to assume that the things worth knowing about are the rare ones. The treasures, the relics, the objects behind glass. But the most universally trusted medicine in human history wasn't any of that. It was the most common plant a person could possibly step on. The weed that follows us everywhere we go, that survives everything we do to it, and that quietly healed us on 6 different continents while we mostly treated it like litter. The Saxons looked at a plant that got run over by carts and refused to die, and they decided a god must have made it. Standing here now, with the chemistry laid out in front of us, that doesn't actually sound as far-fetched as it used to. If you found yourself looking at a weed differently than you did 15 minutes ago, that's the whole point of this channel. We take the most ordinary thing we can find and follow it until it stops being ordinary. So next time you're walking out your door, look down at the edge of the path. The mother of herbs is probably right there, waiting, exactly where it's been the entire time. If you want more hidden histories like this one, the next video is already up on the screen. Go watch it.